Good morning. I'm going to try again. Good morning. Much better. Thanks a lot for inviting me to come and speak to you. I started working on my presentation, and as it was starting to read like a research paper, I started twitching, and it reminded me of my corporate days. And I thought, let me put a little bit of a twist to it so that it doesn't read like a research paper. So back in the days, I don't know if you remember this, but in the 80s and 90s, there was these movies that we used to watch about the bionic man and the hovering cars and aliens coming to open fields and trying to do research on us as humans because we'd invaded their worlds. There used to be a lot of virtual reality introduced into our movies that didn't quite make sense. And for me, I struggled to relate because it was very clear to me that these things were not happening in a township. Why? Because I lived in one, and I was seeing otherwise dirty, dusty streets, toilets outside of houses, instead of what I was seeing in the movies. So it was quite a bit detached. I definitely didn't see it happening in areas like Mahikeng or Taung because they were so far removed from the cities. And when I had conversations with my grandparents, their stories didn't include anything about the aliens coming into their open fields. In hospitals, I never saw anything that resembled a bionic man. Nothing. And I used to go there often because my mother used to work in a hospital. And all you ever saw was in the corridors was broken wheelchairs and broken beds. So I knew that this future was so far removed from what I could relate to. But yet, in spite of it, I always used to wonder what that world would be like if we lived amongst the whole human bionic man and the hovering cars. Scientists seemed a little bit more familiar in their white coats. And simply because my dad was a pharmacist and he was in the medical sciences, so he researched medication for the future. This is what a township looked like back then. Sadly enough, this is what townships look like in today's world. This, in fact, is pictures of one that is not so far from here, Khayelitsha, which has just been burnt down, or parts of it have been burnt. And we are now making efforts to assist the people there. But you can definitely tell that in this neighborhood, the use of data analytics, very simple, if any. You can tell that the future for hovering cars in these neighborhoods is probably not going to happen, at least not in our lifetime. What excited me most about watching these bionic men and hovering cars and the future of crime type of movies was the possibility of my life being like this, where I could do nothing, where I could just literally chase the sun wherever I went and explore the rest of the world while the robotics did the rest of the work. Is it possible, though? Is it something that we could aspire to, and for how many of us could actually aspire to be that way? Like most fantasies, there's a reality that we've got to wake up to. And that reality is what is happening in the current day. So a couple of years ago, in 2010, I was working for one of the large insurance companies in the country. I was doing well. I was going up in that corporate ladder. And as usual, there was that proverbial carrot that was hanging over my head that you have to go play fetch with. Until that year, I hadn't really made a plan to live that fantasy life that I was chasing. I hadn't really made a plan to leave my corporate life because we're taught, go to school, look for a job, get married, and have your 2.5 children. I had been running a side hustle, though. So I had run a tailoring service. And after 2 years, I'd gotten tired of it. But also, it was a bit of a challenge because I learned the biggest lesson about doing business is in the partnerships. My partners and I weren't on the same page for it. So as a process engineer, I was always thinking operations, efficiency, and all of this. And they were thinking, but does it look beautiful? Which was not quite working with me. I had then won an opportunity in the corporates to work with a development coach. Our conversations were about how am I going to get the carrot so that I can get up in the corporate ladder. Our first conversation was really about how is he going to help me quit the corporate life so I never have to chase this carrot. And he soon realized that this was going to be rather problematic. For him, he was getting paid to help me get that corporate ladder, and I had given him a different agenda. His advice to me is said, you have to be so uncomfortable with the status quo that you seek nothing else but to change it. And that's where I think that we're at in this country. There's a lot of elements that we really need to be so uncomfortable with that we seek to change them. There are so many elements. I mean, I like what Jacques was saying earlier to say, you know, we used to say there's an app for that. And sadly, we probably have built too many apps and lost on the human element of it. And I'm hoping now we can say that there's an industrial engineer for that. Just to coin your phrase, Jacques. So for decades, this is how we've measured the growth of any company. You increase market share, you reduce your inefficiencies, and you gain on capital and your returns. To date, those with the largest access or pool of capital have been able to access the market. They've been able to access the best resources. They've been able to gain traction in unrealistic paces, giving them a larger market share. And naturally, by that, it means that if you didn't have the money, you couldn't dream as far. You've got the idea, you've got the money, you could reach for your dreams. Commercializing ideas really became just about the money that you have. And now this is changing because it's now going to be about the amount of data you have. We've managed to encourage people to start businesses. And we went like wildfire. We started a whole lot of businesses, and then soon realized that they were failing. And in fact, on average, they fail in year 3. And then when you make it to year 5 and you realize, hey, I spent so much time building to make it past year 3, I didn't plan for what happens post year 5. Billions were spent on enterprise and supplier development. And while we've seen an increase in these new businesses, unemployment is still on the rise. And SMEs are failing fast for things that they should not really be failing over. Youth unemployment is a scary one for us in this country, or at least for me. We've got an unemployment rate that's sitting at 38.2%. I don't know about you, but it makes me uncomfortable that it's so close to 50%. Of that 38%, we've got 32.4 that are disengaged, meaning they're not looking for a job, they're not looking to go into a workshop or any form of study, they're not looking for any form of inspiration. And in the hood, we call it mahlale konen. Every day you wake up and all you've got to do is just spend your days in the sun, doing nothing. What are their intentions, we often ask, but also what are our intentions with those kind of people? These could be graduates. On average, I don't know how many graduates are here that just graduated and are concerned about the future of their jobs. But on average, people are spending anything between 8 and 15 months to find a job. Most of those people are on some sort of student loan. So they need to be trying to pay that loan pretty fast, but they can't find the job in order to get there. When they do find the job, they earn peanuts and play years of, can you catch the carrot? In countries where youth unemployment is in single digits, the youth are activists. They are looking to change the status quo. They are restless. And based on the work that we've done in the past 2 years or so, we know that our youth aren't being engaged in the right way. And there's a lot of historical elements to it. Our history is embedded with a lot of the roots as to why we have the issues that we have today. And we have to find a way to fix the psyche of those individuals before we could even strive to build larger corporates or bigger machines to take over the world. And if the futuristic movies that I've watched back in the 80s and 90s is anything to go on about, unemployment will rise as we figure out how to work alongside those robots. In fact, more like how we figure out how to make them do the work and for us to spend the time on the beach. So according to the World Economic Forum, there are several skills that are declining. All the manual labor, management of personnel, so HR services are declining, and there's more and more software that is being built to assess whether you're even right for the job or not. So we really are replacing recruitment consultants. And I looked at this and I was very thankful because my very first job was as a recruitment consultant. So I was very thankful that I skipped that before very, very early on. So this was like back in 2001. But for most of you in the room, you're on the blue side of the screen. So you're already looking at creative thinking. You're already using technology and programming to your best advantage. But this is not a true reflection of what's going on in the education system of our country. So our education is still far back. And I don't think there'll be much objection to me saying that it is probably irrelevant in the context of what we are trying to achieve. In the context of the future of jobs, we're producing more and more people that will be irrelevant in the economy than we are producing people that will be relevant. So it means we are widening that gap between the rich and the poor versus us trying to close that gap. And now that we've sold entrepreneurship as the holy grail and hailed entrepreneurs as messiahs for doing the unthinkable, we cannot continue to be counterproductive in our education system. Schools, universities, educators have the burden of catching up and spreading resources beyond capitalist structures and capitalist mindsets. Unlike the accountants that I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, you guys have a lot less to worry about in terms of where your future of work is going. There's a growing number of development programs striving for some form or other of inclusivity. So be it finance, be it socio-economic development, literacy, or tech. Unfortunately, these areas are saturated, these development programs are all saturated in the big cities. Again, we're leaving behind those that are in the peri-urban areas and in the rural areas. As a result, these people will eventually have to migrate towards these big cities in order to gain access. We can't really afford that. It's full as it is. And take it from someone who's lived in China and seen what having 20 million people around you feels like. You don't want that in this country. We don't have the right infrastructure to cater for that. They managed to build as the population was growing, and we can't play catch up. So our mindsets develop from personalities, behaviors, habits, rituals, most of which we learn from our early childhood. And this is where we need to start cultivating the right types of mindsets for the future. People that will actually have the skills to even deal with the amount of data that will be thrown at them, or even understand the use of facial recognition and its benefits. And not just shout, well, the sky is falling, because they don't understand it. So we've been doing things with children. This is a design-a-thon that we host annually, but we've also been adapting it with the young unemployed youth in the country. Now, last year we were focusing on water pollution because it was relevant considering the water crisis that we're having, especially for the Cape-Townians. But they were given resources for the day. So as you can see, it's boxes. Lego was kind enough to sponsor some Lego kits with some electronic devices as well. But these children were put in a room, and they come from very different backgrounds and different schools, and most of them actually didn't come in groups of more than 3. So we gave them a challenge for the day, and each group had to design what would be their proposed solution to this water pollution challenge that we had. They were designing drones, filtration systems. And this is 7-year-olds, by the way. So they were already thinking about drones, filtration systems. They were having detection systems built into it. And the mind of a child is fascinating because it is really not confined by anything. We grow up, and a lot of our life experiences and what teachers tell us, and we get fit into a box, and we're created to think a certain way. But you put it with kids that really, no rules, just a challenge. Build whatever comes to mind. And they told the most fascinating stories as to how all of these solutions could actually come to life and sort out some of the problems that we were having. Some of them attracted quite a lot of interest from an international organization. So on the day, we linked them to last year we linked them to 18 cities. This year it will be 30 cities around the world, and each of them are focusing on the same challenge. And in engaging with the people from different parts of the world, they then realized that, hang on, so a lot of what I've built is based on where I come from. So I only am going to build a solution because I can relate to the problem in this particular manner, and my environment has everything to do with that. When your education has already made you think out the box, then you start seeing the children be more and more active. And they will almost want to take the lead into how the solution should be built. But in encouraging them to speak to one another about why do you want to do it that particular way, they started learning about each other's environments, and then could take that into the solution that they were building. And with the limited resources they have on the day, there's zero complaint about government intervention. There's zero complaint about funding. And there is zero complaint about the non-presence of adults in the room. When you do it with the youth, however, most of them unemployed, there is a lot of complaints about the government. This said, who said that, who did this, and who did the other. And we have to do a lot of work to say, forget all of those things and focus on what you've got in order to build the solution that you need to solve that problem. So I would like you to encourage this, and I'd like to encourage you to incorporate these methodologies into the schooling systems, so that it is not just a linear approach to designing, but we're taking into account what it is the environments that people come from. Now, this is a report that was done by FinFund this year. It was released in June of this year. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask for money. But this is the reasons why SMEs that are developing in this country, as innovative as they may be, are struggling to access funding. The lack of knowledge in how to raise money or manage money. And again, this is very indicative of where we come from. So if you've only been living on a salary of 2,500 Rand and feeding 5 people in the house, your management skills of money are very, very different from somebody who's going to be earning 50,000 Rand and having to run a household. Your logic of saving and your logic of when there is money, what can I do with this money, is very, very different. Then the issue of readiness for external funding. Those of you who are running your own businesses will know how difficult it is to remain compliant in this country. It's a full-time job all on its own. And when you're already running a one-man show, it's very difficult to then split yourself to keep up with that level of compliance. But in any case, it becomes a hindrance when you are applying for funding. Then we've got to battle the traditional credit scores and assessments models. Banks are probably the most guilty when it comes to this. And with their adoption of AI technology, it means we are noticing an increase in the number of declined applications for funding. So that needs to also change. But that also won't necessarily change, and I used to work for banks, so I kind of know that it won't necessarily change for the long term because banks are in the business of making money based on credit. And that credit is more attractive to give to somebody who's already got large sums of capital than it is for somebody who's got zero in their bank account. And they claim they want to see consistency in your historical data. Someone argued, well, zero bank balance is also a very consistent approach to my finances. Then we got issues around data gaps. So how many SMEs are actually operating in this country? We don't really know. We have some vague ideas. And we can't necessarily rely on SAIIE, the company registrar, to give us those details, because there's a lot of businesses that are registered but dormant, so there's not very much activity. So you can't necessarily rely on them from a statistical point of view. But there's also a large number of businesses that are operating that are not registered. So you then miss out on them. We don't understand the growth rate of SMEs. So while we've calculated that they fail within the first 3 years, we don't know how well they're growing. We don't know if they're really growing. There's challenges around access to markets. How do we do that? Access to resources and access to finance as a whole. And if these challenges continue, what is the point of me coming up with the innovation, with innovative products? And that's the general sentiment that is going out there. The capital for startups is very limited. And you need acrobatic talents just to get through the hoops to access that capital. In a progressive ecosystem, this kind of information would be seen as opportunities to re-engineer the process models, the business models that are out there that are supportive of the SME sector. Instead, they're used as barriers of entry. Now, there's another report that was done by UNDE, which is the ESPEN's Network of Development Entrepreneurs. Their report showed that 0% of 214 organizations that say they support SMEs in this country were actually investing in the ideation phase. So 0% in your ideation phase. If my idea is not invested in, are we really realistic in seeing those SMEs creating job opportunities, creating innovative products or services? How will we ever close this gap? Eventually, we need to change the definition of a citizen in good standing. Nowadays, a citizen in good standing means you've got a healthy credit score and you're compliant with the tax man. In the future, this will be changing in the form of loyalty points, using blockchain for voting, creating more transparency. Now, if you think our government is worried, wait till we start using blockchain voting systems. And social media has already become the measure of market share. And that will probably grow as we go and continue. We've seen the rise of freelancers, especially in the millennials who are not necessarily interested in growing long-term careers with one organization. And in fact, they've been seen to have an attention span of 3 years. So maybe businesses are failing because the millennials are starting the businesses and their attention span is only 3 years. Volunteering is also growing. Now, in this country, I would really like to see it grow a little bit faster. I've watched how in Asia, and China particularly, unemployment is low because there's a lot of people that are volunteering as a means to earn a roof over your head, as a means to earn groceries. If more and more people did that, we really could find alternative means to work our way out of poverty that does not necessarily require cash in the form of rands. This will also bring about new capital and trading platforms. So banks and taxmen need to start getting worried because the disruption of their business models is really going to be goodness and kindness. But then we have to then question, will employment still be relevant if all of us start becoming freelancers and volunteers? So I've spoken a lot about the enablers and have left out the government out of this picture for health reasons. Their job for me, in my view, is to work on the policies that need to support the environment in which we're creating. Theirs is not to be creating the jobs. And we're going to hear a lot of that as they walk around with the election campaign soon. And a lot of them will start using words like fourth industrial revolution. They will start using AI, robotics into their conversations and part of their election campaign, only to buy your sentiment to say that we are thinking of the future. The sad part is, when you engage with them, they don't know what all of that means. They really don't know what all of that means. So it makes it harder when you have developed a prototype or a solution and you want to then say, hey, Mr. Government, this is what's going to change the community in which I live in. They're not particularly interested, especially if you say it is only going to affect my township and not all townships. The reality is we do need a localized investment into those projects. We do need investment from a sense of your skills and your knowledge. So I'll use the example of the accountants that I spoke to a couple of weeks ago. When I started talking about robotics and AI to them, they didn't understand, like, cannot compute at all, right? But I started appealing to them to say, if you took your accounting skills and you engaged with somebody that is building a robot, there's a lot that you could teach them, or building AI into their industry. There's a lot that you can teach them that they are not aware of. But there's a lot that they can do for you in order for you to manage your world a lot better. But because the two worlds don't engage, we then lose out on that social capital. Because everyone, the rest of the world is sitting there going, well, I'm not a techie. I don't know how to program. And the rest of us in this room are sitting, well, I'm not an accountant. I'm not a banker. I don't know numbers, at least not in that format. I'm sure you could do it in a theorem of some sort, but not in that format. But because we see ourselves separate, the picture starts to fall apart. While our organizations are out there creating smart and high-tech solutions, our biggest challenge with the digital age, the bionic man, the hovering cars, will be making it accessible to the children that have to date have only seen it in the movies. The people that are sitting today that don't understand where this technology comes from or why it is will only understand it if you are going to engage them on that subject matter. Well, I'm not here asking for funding for SMEs or for myself or any other SME, mind you. I'm going to ask for your social capital. I'm going to ask that we propel our activities and our way into the digital age by engaging with other people and bringing back the human element of it so that we are not a world that is lost in robotics or bionic man or cyborgs. That we actually, earlier when I was having breakfast, earlier I saw someone wearing a t-shirt from Tsimologong. Now I can't see him anymore. But I know that they're one of the centers that are working with people to make sure that their products can see the real world. I was quite excited to see one from the graduate school outside, one of their banners that says, engineers make dreams come true. And if that is the case, if that is what we're hoping to achieve with AI or the future of things, let it be on the basis of humanity. Let it be on the basis of improving the lives of others and not so much about just us getting ahead. And our efforts of driving inclusivity in this industrial revolution should read like a MasterCard tagline. Our efforts should be priceless. Thank you.
Okay, it seems like we do have a couple of times for questions, so Marang, don't move too far away. And Dr. Thies, if you will also just join us again on stage just to take a couple of questions, please. Hands. Anybody have questions? No questions. There is a question. Just hold on for the mic.
Sorry, Marang. What platforms are currently available to link the, let's call it the investors with your small SMEs or the localized development of new products or technologies?
Well, first it's a bending microphone. No, so there are a couple of platforms. There's one called Growth Wheel, right? And they engage with the entrepreneurs themselves, and then they link them to a business mentor. And based on that need of the individual company, they're able to then expand it to banks or funding agencies or prototyping or things like that. Our platform is also one lean business platform. With that one, we've got people loading their business models, so they structure their ideas. We then have a pitch night every quarter where we then link them in a room like this where they come through and they pitch, so they're well prepared for their pitch as well. And they come from all different types of sectors. From that, we are also, and if they're not in the room, we are able to link them to funders, we are able to link them to other development programs, we are able to link them to communities so that they can also validate their business ideas.
And can you guys see any trends with the types of projects coming in? Because, I mean, you said data is one of the problems you currently have. Are you guys capturing that type of data and the information coming from the types of projects, or categorizing that maybe to see an improvement opportunity within your line of work going forward?
So our platform does tell you things like the growth objectives of that particular business. So if they need skills like I need an industrial engineer to come and look at or assist me with a prototype or anything like that, we're able to link them that way. We are able to see it on a dashboard to say, well, these people clearly need some sort of either skills intervention to assist them, or if it's financial intervention that they need from there.
Thank you.
Question over there in the aisle.
Thank you. To Prof. I work in a regulatory environment. We regulate products at the point of sale. It could be electrical and electronic products, automotive, vehicles, and so on. What sort of conversations then should be held with regulators like ourselves in this space of the fourth industrial revolution?
Just what type of conversations should manufacturing be having with regulatory bodies in terms of the fourth industrial revolution?
Okay. The regulatory bodies do have the problem of controlling this digitization processes and the data security issue. I think that is one of the most important ones which need for some kind of regulation and some kind of new technology probably which has to be put forward. Because the regulatory bodies, as far as I understand it, are interested in having production as such cheaper and cheaper every time, because that increases, if you like, the GDP. And therefore, it is necessary to provide all the boundary conditions for allowing this type of progress. And one of the big boundary condition problems, obstacles, as I have shown, is the cybersecurity.
More questions? Good for now. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much again to Dr. Thies and Marang. I think we've had an incredible morning from our keynotes, starting with setting the scene around exactly what is Industry 4.0, what effects does that have on the economy, where do people factor into that, and also with Marang, setting the South African scene and understanding how Industry 4.0 will need to be phased into the South African space and how we deal with those challenges. So thank you very much for two very insightful keynotes. And now we are turning the floor to you. What are your solutions to Industry 4.0? How are you taking the challenges? I saw an interesting quote from Steve Jobs who said, some people ask what it is, and other people ask, how do we use it? And we're looking forward to our industrial engineers and industrial engineering professionals to come and tell us how are we going to use Industry 4.0 in our various industries and sectors of society to go forward. The conference is now yours. Thank you for joining us. There is now a tea break, and then there will be the 4 different track sessions before we head off to lunch. Thank you very much.